Let's get going. Welcome to SassafrasCast.
Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Where you gonna be tonight? Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. There's magic coming. Get ready for the rest of your life.
Hello and welcome to SassafrasCast. How are we doing today? I have a very special episode for you today. And if you are listening to the audio, I will be describing everything. However, if you feel like tuning in for the video, this might be the good episode to try that out because I have a 2-camera setup for the first time today. I have myself talking to you, broadcasting, perhaps holding up the occasional card, and I have the card table, aka my piano bench, where I will be laying out spreads for you to look at. And since we're talking about reading card pulls and reading spreads today, it may be helpful to have that visual component. So wherever you're listening to this right now, whether you are live, if you're live, you're seeing the video. If you're live, if you're a patron, you are in the YouTube broadcasting studio with me. For everyone else, wherever you're listening or consuming this, if you are listening on an audio, know that the video version of this is available to you at youtube.com/@Sassafras Tarot. Gotta get that @ symbol in there. It's like the @ symbol. youtube.com/@Sassafras Tarot. If you just search Sassafras Tarot on YouTube, you'll probably find me. And you may enjoy watching this as a video. Definitely, if you're the kind of person like me who listens to podcasts in your car, feel free. I think you'll get a lot out of it no matter what, but if you want to have that video visual component as we talk about laying out spreads and what directions cards are facing and things like that, I think it will be useful to see the video. Okay? Okay. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about how to read the tarot. We've been doing a section of the podcast called SassafrasCast Teaches You Tarot. And so far, what we've done is go through the tarot deck to give this strong foundation of the different suits and therefore the different elements and what each of those elements are associated with, as well as the major arcana. And we went through card by card to really talk about what each card means and how it might come up in different contexts. And now we're connecting the dots. We're talking about like, okay, now you understand. Now our goal is to understand, okay, so whatever, like the emperor means this. The emperor can mean leadership or authority. The emperor can mean patriarchy. The emperor can be a signal as an advice card to step into your leadership or authority, or as a card of someone else in your life. It may be someone who's trying to have authority over you. And that's great. And that's a very juicy meaning that we can dig into because there's many layers and possibilities. But as a beginner, that's very overwhelming because you're like, okay, how do I know which meaning is which? How do I connect the dots? So that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about doing card pulls and spreads and how to connect the dots between what's going on in your life and what the tarot is informing you of. So that's the story. In just a moment, I will be coming in with the witchy weather report, but first I would like to give a shout out to my patrons. Thank you to Amanda Curry, Melissa Marie, Rachel Miller, Grayson, Millie Orozco, Ruby, Rebecca Jones, Brittany Campbell, Ginger Dawn Studios, Savannah Tillett, and Joey Neal. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. If you did not know, my patrons get kind of a backstage pass to everything I do. They get a literal backstage pass to the recording session for each podcast via a private, unlisted YouTube link. And you can become a patron if you desire to by just visiting patreon.com/Sassafras Tarot, and you can pledge $1 a month or more. I record these episodes live, and I try to give as much as I can to my patrons because I'm appreciative of their support of me and being a part of this community. So my patrons get to hang out for the live recording. If they're live with me, they can get their questions and ideas into the broadcast in real time. They also get access to a Discord server where we talk about witchy and wonderful things, and a shout out in each episode, as we just did. So if you want to be a part of that, patreon.com/Sassafras Tarot is the place to be. First, we're going to do the Witchy Weather Report. I will be doing the Witchy Weather Report with our friend, the Everyday Witch Tarot. The Everyday Witch Tarot is what I have been using as my kind of default deck for the SassafrasCast Teaches You Tarot series. And I do that because I've gone into this in different episodes, so I'll be a little bit brief, but basically because the imagery is familiar. What people think of as the classic deck, the Rider-Smith-Waite deck, or Rider-Waite-Smith deck, depending on how you're saying it, illustrated by Pamela Coleman Smith. There are many decks that really kind of clone that imagery, which doesn't mean it's the exact same. It means that they take the imagery and symbols in those cards and they really build a deck around those with their own, of course, unique artwork. And the Everyday Witch Tarot is one such deck. So are the images exactly the same as in the Smith-Waite Tarot? No, not line for line, of course not. But they're going to give you the same ideas. They're going to have much of the same symbolism on them. They're going to be drawn in such a way as to evoke the same meanings. And of course, every deck has its own personality, and I'll be talking about that possibly in next month's episode. We're going to have a round 2, and I think it's going to be a little bit of a Q&A. So if you have a question about reading tarot, if you have a question about like how to get beyond the basics or a stumbling block, I want you to reach out to me, sassafrastarot@gmail.com. SassafrasTarot. I chose 2 difficult words to spell and I made them my brand name. This is who I am as a person. If you want to reach out, sassafrastarot@gmail.com. If you have like stumbling blocks you want to talk about or questions you want to ask to go deeper with your study of the tarot, that's what we'll be focusing on in our next week's lesson. Next month's lesson. We're going to basically, I'm going to teach you how to read spreads today. So at the end of this lesson, you're going to like be able to just go forth and read the tarot, you know? But as we move forward, there's an opportunity to dig a little deeper, right? And there's an opportunity to help us, and we experience common stumbling blocks. So if you're experiencing something you want some insight on, I will address that in the next episode. I want some questions so I can answer them. sassafrastarot@gmail.com, or feel free to leave a comment anywhere on social media. I'm Sassafras Tarot pretty much everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, other places. All right. Let's get to the Witchy Weather Report. This is a 1-card pull I do every episode to kind of give us an idea of the weather. And my intention when I pull this card is that whenever and wherever you are listening to this broadcast or viewing it, whether it's live, whether it's the week of, whether it's weeks later or months or years later, whenever it finds you, that it have something relevant to you in that moment. So that's my intention when I pull the card, that it be time independent, and when it reaches you, that's when it has the information that you want to hear. So always when I pull these cards, I look at them more as a piece of guidance. And it's funny, we'll be dissecting this a little bit later in the episode. So I'll just get right into it. I'm shuffling right now. I'm using the Everyday Witch Tarot by Elizabeth Alba and Deborah Blake. Elizabeth Alba is the illustrator. Deborah Blake is the author. And our card is the High Priestess. So it's really a time right now. And as I'm recording this, I will just share a few things. One, Mercury's in Gatorade. If you're tuned in around the second half of December, like I'm starting this recording on December 16th, 2023. If you're tuned in real time or close to real time with me, Mercury's in Gatorade. We're also obviously going into a new year. We just had a new moon, so the moon is currently waxing. So if you are in real time, the Witchy Weather Report is that it's a good time to build towards what you want, but also Mercury is in retrograde, so you may experience setbacks and you may experience like weird communication and iffiness and the feeling of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's the nature of Mercury retrograde. Therefore, it's recommended to focus on projects and ideas that maybe you have already wanted to focus on in your life, to continue project or to revisit or review. Mercury retrograde loves words that starts with R-E, re. To be retrospective, to reconsider, to reverse engineer. So it's a good time to work on parts of your life that you've already been working with, and do what you can to level them up. That kind of activity is favored during Mercury retrograde. Starting a whole new project is not always favored during Mercury retrograde. That's the kind of thing that you can find that there are a lot of roadblocks and sometimes information that comes out after the fact that would have changed your approach. So for what it's worth, if you believe any of this at all, if this is meaningful to you, that's something you can do with at this time. Again, time dependent if you're listening in the moment around second half of December 2023. Regardless of when you're listening, our card right now is the High Priestess. It's time for us to look inwards. It's time for us to trust our intuition. Our focus at this time should be about building our relationship with ourself, our relationship with our spirituality and personal philosophy, whatever that means to us. You don't have to tack on and ascribe new beliefs that you don't necessarily have. But if there's a belief you've been wanting to go deeper with, or a spiritual experience you've been wanting to go deeper with, this is the call. The High Priestess is encouraging you to look inward rather than outward. I would say that Mercury retrograde also favors that motion. And I will continue that in a very real way, when we have Mercury retrograde and the High Priestess, it suggests an opportunity for work on the past, work on revisiting and healing from past experiences, past trauma, relearning and revising our thinking around maybe we had a bad experience when we were younger, and now as an older person we can recontextualize the experience and perhaps change some behaviors that may have come out of that. I've just dropped a card on the floor, so I'm going to go get it. So the name of the game during this time is to go inward, go deeper, look for your inner voice rather than a logical, well, here's how it should work. We want to experience and have a qualitative experience in our lives at this time. We can learn a great deal about ourselves and our inner world, our subconscious, as well as whatever we feel we are connecting to spiritually. At this time, that work is favored. So maybe put a pause on needing to be constantly productive and allow yourself to focus within. Okay, let's get into it. Hydration checkpoint, everybody. If you are watching along or listening along at home, this is a great time to take a sip of water or whatever you're sipping on. Get hydrated. Cheers. I have to actively remind myself to drink water during podcasting, otherwise I regret it because talking will wear my voice out. All right, we're going to be talking today about how to read the tarot. If you have not listened before, you may wish to revisit the other episodes of SassafrasCast Teaches You Tarot. There have been 5 of them so far, going over the major arcana and each of the suits in the deck of tarot cards using the Smith-Waite system. If you're already familiar with the meanings of the cards and want to take your readings to the next level and want to get better at connecting the dots, this is the episode for you. If you're like, yeah, I've looked at the tarot, I've learned some keywords, I've done some studying, but how to connect the dots. This is what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to start with, we're going to talk about a few different types of tarot spreads today. And the smallest tarot spread is a 1-card spread, often called a 1-card pull, meaning you are pulling a card out of the deck, right? This is the common language people use. People talk about 1 or 2 card pulls, meaning you're pulling a card or a couple cards out of the deck for essentially a quick reading, or using a full tarot spread, which could use, several or many tarot cards. It could use the smallest tarot spread would be a 1-card pull. You lay out 1 card, or you add more cards to contextualize so that you can see the relationships between cards. When you lay out a spread, generally, but not always, each individual place that you're placing a card has its own meaning inside assigned to it, which means that you get another layer of meaning. So when you're doing a 1-card pull, even if you're just pulling 1 card, it's useful to do this as well. It's useful to ask a question that assigns a meaning to the card so that you can connect the dots. This is going to be the first lesson I want to share with you, is that when you are pulling a card for the tarot, you want to be able to give yourself as much context as you can so that you can have a meaningful answer, right? Because if I'm just pick a card, let's see, what's up, universe? And I get, for example, I just pulled the Knight of Pentacles. Well, this could mean a lot of things because I've given no context. It could mean somebody like the Knight of Pentacles is coming into my life. It could mean I'm supposed to be like the Knight of Pentacles right now. It could mean I am like the Knight of Pentacles right now. It could mean I'm embarking on kind of a new project around earning money or around self-care or around home improvement. We have a lot of options for what this card could mean. Now we can look deeper within my life and contextualize that, right? I could say like, okay, I see how this card has relevance in my life if I'm an experienced reader. But what if we were to pull a card and say, hey, tarot deck, what is the energy I need in my life right now? Who should I be? Like, how can I step forward as my best self? What energy should I bring to each day? That's a very specific ask, and that allows you to dramatically increase the relevance of your card. Then, if I pull the Knight of Pentacles, the answer is clear. You're supposed to be the Knight of Pentacles right now. The Knight of Pentacles, we know, is a knight, so we know he's questing. We know that he is an earth sign, so he's focused on, he or she or they, is focused on stability and resource. Building that stability in their life, using their resources or building their resources, and there's a sense of questing. So if you don't even know the specific meaning of the Knight of Pentacles, just having those two pieces of information can give you some good information. Who am I meant to be right now? What energy should I bring to the world? You are meant to quest, and you are meant to build your stability and your resources. Now, if I said that to you, you will probably have a couple of ideas right now that are applicable in your life, right? If on the other hand, we ask a very different question. If we say, what's the energy of, this person I'm considering starting to date? That's a question as a tarot reader, especially one who does events and parties. I do get asked those questions. I get asked love life questions a lot, What's the energy of this person that I'm starting to date? And the Knight of Pentacles came up, I'd be like, well, here's a very practical person. They are resourceful. They're focused right now on that. They're focused on building their stability and their career. They may not do a sweep you off your feet kind of romance, but they're also steady and practical, and you can probably take them at their word, So this is like good information. So you're seeing, I think, how the context of the question can dramatically affect the reading, right? It means different things. You could also do a kind of reverse reading and say, what kind of energy should I avoid? What do I need to leave in 2023, right? We're approaching a new year right now. What energy do I need to leave in 2023 to open the door? If the Knight of Pentacles is the answer, then, okay, maybe I need to leave this questing knight energy in 2023. Either I need to embrace my authority and accept that maybe I've leveled up, or perhaps this is no longer just like the area of my life I need to be questing about. Maybe I don't need to be questing about my stability and resource right now. I need to have another focus. So depending on the question, the same card can have three very different answers. So when we do a one-card pull, I have just given you a crash course in doing a one-card pull. When we do a one-card pull, we ask a question so that we give ourselves in the tarot the best chance at having a good conversation, right? Mercury's in retrograde right now, and what a lot of people talk about during Mercury retrograde is communication problems. When we do a reading with the tarot, we are having a communication. We are having a conversation with the tarot deck. So when we do this, we want to give ourselves the best opportunity we can to have a meaningful conversation where we understand each other well. And so by asking a very direct, very specific question, we can do that, right? Just as like, if you are a parent and you ask your kid when they get home from school, how was your day today? You might kind of get a pretty vague answer, right? A parent taught me this. I'm not a parent, but it is useful as a conversation topic. They were like, I don't ask my kid how his day was because he'll just be like, fine. Instead, I'm like, tell me about something interesting that happened in your day today, or tell me something good that happened today, or tell me about an interesting conversation you had today, or tell me something you learned today. When we ask a very specific question, we're more likely to get an answer. When we ask a vague question, our brain's like, fine. Similarly with the tarot cards, right? When we ask a vague question, it's hard for us to pinpoint what the answer means because we didn't ask. We probably do have something we want to know, but if we're not sure, if we do want to say, hey, what's up, universe, we can at least even qualify that further. That's that's a catchphrase I do when I'm doing readings for people because I think it makes the tarot very approachable. When people come to my table at a party or an event or whatever, the first question I ask them is, okay, what are we talking about today? What's the topic of conversation? What are we interested in discussing today? And often that question will be enough for them to share what they'd like to get a reading about. Now, often I read at parties and events where someone didn't necessarily walk in the door expecting to get a tarot reading that day, but are excited about the opportunity. So often I ask them that and they're like, oh, well, I think I'd like to ask about this. And sometimes they have a few things, and sometimes they're brought up short and they're like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know I had to have, I didn't know I had to have a topic. And it's like, it's okay. You don't have to have a topic. We can say, hey, universe, what's up? And they're like, yes, that is, if you just want to get a reading and you're not quite sure, what information you want, you can say, hey, universe, what's up? I recommend doing that with a spread that has a few set meanings in it so that you can have that context, because a spread is like asking the tarot to answer multiple questions that are in relationship to each other. However, if you want to do this with a one card pull, let's make a slightly more specific question than, hey, universe, what's up? We could say, hey, universe, what can I expect to encounter in my day today? Hey, universe, what might surprise me today? Hey, universe, what will I have an interesting conversation about today? If we're doing a card for the day, which a lot of people recommend, let's ask a more specific question so that we can get a more specific answer. Because when we're starting out and we pull a card for the day, it may be hard to connect the dots about what it means. Until sometimes after the fact we can, sometimes no. So if we ask a specific question, it allows us to get some more context and allows us to flex our tarot muscles as we consider the context of that question and the card in question. For example, if I said, hey, universe, I have to have this difficult conversation with somebody today. What's my best approach to that conversation? How should I approach it? And I pull a card. I'm pulling a card right now. We have the moon, which suggests that conversation may have layers of meaning that both of us aren't communicating. And I say that because I'm a tarot reader who has been reading for a long time. So I look at the moon. I'm like, moon, conversation. Not everything is being said. But let me reverse engineer that for you. Because that's what you'll be doing if you pull a card for yourself every day, especially as a beginner. You'll be looking at the moon, possible meanings for the moon. The moon can be about our subconscious. It can be about illusions that we have. It can be about what is seen when it's not full dark but not full light. When we look out the window at our backyard in moonlight, it looks very different than looking at it in full sunlight. Things are obscured, it's confusing, we're not quite sure what we're looking at. Our imagination takes hold, in other words. And the moon is about that. It's about the subconscious meeting our conscious perception and forming something new, which in a way we're doing all the time, right? When I say something to you, when I don't know, make a post on Facebook and 15 different people interpret it 15 different ways, and a good percentage of them are offended about it because Facebook. What's happening is one person is saying one thing and 15 people or however many people are reading what they said, reading the actual words that they said, and adding to it their own subconscious beliefs, ideas, feelings, both in the moment and in their lives. And they're arriving at an intention and a meaning that may or may not be what I put into it, right? We see this happen all the time where people misinterpret, people can get real angry on Facebook and really are you saying, those kind of conversations can happen on Facebook because it's text and there's a lot of room for interpretation. And our subconscious is only too happy to fill in the blanks, right? So the moon is about that process. It's about the process of our subconscious trying to fill in the blanks. We can learn a lot about ourselves during that time. Now, if I was to ask the tarot, how do I approach this difficult conversation I have to have, and the moon comes up, then what I need to take away is that my subconscious is at play and the other person's subconscious is at play, and knowing that whatever I say, they may receive it with extra layers of meaning I don't intend, and knowing too that they may be saying things and I may be putting layers of meaning on it that they don't intend. So there's a call to clarity here, right? If I want that conversation to go well, that's something that should be addressed right from the get-go. We should say, let's try to be very clear with each other and listen carefully to each other, because I don't want us to have a misunderstanding, and I'm willing to believe it could happen on both sides, right? And also, as we consider that conversation later, it's worth going back over it and reflecting was I reacting in the moment to what the person was saying, or was I reacting to something my subconscious was saying? And to the ability that we have to perceive that in others, were they reacting to what I was saying, or were they reacting to something subconscious that I truly wasn't saying? And this is not about pointing fingers, right? It's just about like trying to clear up this obviously messy communication. Happy Mercury retrograde. So I always teach by example. And as you can see, there's a million different meanings one card can have in different contexts. Now, when I pulled out the moon, something else happened that I wasn't intending to cover in this episode, but now I'm gonna. I had a jumper. Have you ever heard that phrase? A jumper card. Literally, when you're shuffling and you're like a butterfingers, pardon me. If you're watching, you just watch me duck down to get the jumper. There were two of them. Sometimes a card falls out of the deck. Some people choose to pay attention to that. Some people don't. Some people feel it's situational, right? In other words, was I kind of shuffling stupid and not paying attention and I made a mess? Maybe it's me, not the universe. You know what I mean? But if it's like, oh wow, that card jumped out at me, many people interpret it as like, there's something I need to stop and listen to right now. I did not stop and listen to it right then, but I did notice that there were two jumpers. And the jumpers were the Nine of Pentacles and the Fool. How do you interpret a jumper card? You're laying out a spread and you're, and the tarot's like, no, these cards now, or this card right now. You don't get a chance for there to be context, right? Because the context is almost like the tarot interrupting you and going like, shut up. This is what I have to say, right? So again, it's great to have context. When we have a jumper, we don't have context other than the universe is like, hey, pay attention. Like, shh, I'm talking, right? Like that's what the universe is saying to us when it gives us a jumper card. So the context we do have is like, this is something I may be inclined to miss. And that's why the universe is kind of like smacking me in the face with it, right? Now, the two cards, now if you're reading for yourself, that context is easy to like, okay, here's something I might be missing. The universe is telling me. If you're reading for a client, a querent, we may apply that knowledge to them. We may say, oh, this is a jumper card. You said you wanted to talk about this, but here are the topics of these two cards. Is something going on in that area of your life? And it can become a conversation starter, and it can become very meaningful. And if they're like, oh yeah, actually this or that has been happening and I really do need to address it, cool, that answers your question. If they're like, no, actually I don't feel like there's anything going on in my life, keep the cards in your head. You know, either take a picture of them or put them aside while you lay out the spread, because they may add clarity later as the rest of the spread is revealed. You might look back at them and be like, oh, in context, I now see what that means. And we'll talk more about that as we're reading a spread. So I'll just share these two cards that jumped out at me were the Nine of Pentacles and the Fool. I know the personal meaning these cards have for me. I'm going to share it, but I'll share for you. If I was interpreting these jumper cards for a querent, for perhaps the querent of everybody who listens to this podcast, right? Because this is a group conversation here. The thing that we may not be paying attention to, but we need to, is the Fool and the Nine of Pentacles. So let's talk about that. The Nine of Pentacles, it's like these cards are polar opposites, because the Nine of Pentacles is about being safe, stable, secure, enjoying what you have created for yourself, enjoying the life and the home you have given yourself. You have worked hard for the opportunity to now like relax and enjoy what you have. Whereas the Fool is an adventuresome card. The Fool is about like, literally, often in the tarot, it's portrayed as like someone about to walk off a cliff. And it doesn't mean, it's called the Fool because they're being a bit naive and they're being so excited that they're not necessarily looking where they're going. But their energy usually carries them through. It's generally a positive card about new beginnings. It's the energy of, this is a new beginning. We don't know exactly what will take place, but we know we're excited and there's a lot of growth potential, right? That's the energy of the Fool. And here's what I'll share, and I know that there is a direct and relevant meaning in my life, but these cards together, what I would say is that if you don't have this sense of inner sanctuary, which is what the Nine of Pentacles represents, you've worked hard and created a sanctuary for yourself, very literally in a practical way. You have a place you can go and space for yourself to be a human, to allow yourself to relax, to allow yourself to enjoy what you've worked hard for. If you don't have that moment of sanctuary, it's very hard to access this moment of enthusiasm and adventure. because we need that moment of sanctuary to allow us to not feel overwhelmed all the time. We put ourselves in our comfort zone in the Nine of Pentacles as an act of loving care so that later we are fully rested and replenished when it's time to go out of our comfort zone and think big again, right? It's common advice right now, and it drives me nuts, and I say it a lot, that people say things like, your growth begins outside your comfort zone. And the implication is, if you're comfortable, you're not going to grow, asshole. I curse on this podcast, by the way. There's the explicit rating. Now it's here. That's why it's explicit. It's just because I curse like a sailor. Anyway, the truth is, we need times when we are comfortable so that when it is time to grow, which does require our discomfort, so that we are able to do that, so that we are in an environment of growth and we're willing to be like the Fool and be like, I don't know exactly where I'm going, but I'm so excited I'm doing anyway, right? If we never get that comfort zone, if we don't experience our comfort, then we are walking around reactive and triggered all the time. And guess what? That doesn't bring us growth, that brings us stress. And often what it does is cause us to fall back on old stories and fall back on bad habits because we are not getting the chance to fully process all the new information getting thrown at us, so we're just stressed out. So the message here is that these two things must go hand in hand. In order to have your carefree new adventure in life, you must also have space and comfort and time to yourself. In order to expand and think big, you must have times when you're allowed to relax and be small. And when I say be small, I mean like not be trying to change the world in a big way, not be trying to change your life in a big way, just being with what is and being in a place that feels comforting and allows you, if you need to kind of curl up in a blanket and be a blanket burrito for a minute. Everybody has that need, and doing so is healthy. It's healthy for us to do this and give ourselves a comfort zone and give ourselves a place to both reflect on how far we've come and appreciate what we've given ourselves and wrap ourselves in comfort so that when we are ready to take that big leap, we are fully, fully ready for it. So that's a bonus witchy weather report, guys. That was the jumper card for today, and that's how I've chosen to interpret it. And I've tried my best as I'm interpreting these things, especially today, to reverse engineer how I'm interpreting them so that it can become clear to you how to connect the dots. We just accidentally did a 2-card reading, which is the next topic. We're talking about, we talked about how to do a 1-card pull, and it's most effective as a direct answer to a direct question. When we do a 2-card reading, the 2 cards have a relationship. It's almost less important, although I still think it's useful to have a direct question because I'm going to sound like a Virgo now. The more data points you have, the more you can connect the dots into a cohesive story, right? It's helpful, right? When we just interpreted the Fool and the Nine of Pentacles in a way that I think is pretty clear, that probably many of us can look at our lives and apply it. But how would our interpretation change if the question we had asked and gotten those 2 cards in answer to, if the question we had asked was, what do I need to know about my money right now? Well, it would be clear that we need, like, we could have a very, like, that could mean a balanced portfolio, right? Like taking some risks, but also taking some deeply stable moves, right? That could literally mean balancing your stock portfolio so that you don't have a ton of risk in there, but you have some risk so you can have big growth, but you also have the less risky stocks that are going to carry you through if there is, if the stock market takes a dive for a day or a couple weeks or whatever. And for those of you who do not speak stock market, if you're asking about your finances, it could mean, okay, like do some fun stuff. And do some stuff that might be, like, throw some money at something that might grow and might be a big reward for you, but also make sure you're saving your money for a rainy day. Also make sure you're doing the things that will give you simple comfort and stability along the way. Now, how would those 2 cards change if we ask the question, what should I do in my love life? Notice I'm asking what should I do questions, and that's because I think they're the best questions to ask the tarot. When we ask for guidance from the tarot can be very helpful. But we can also ask questions that don't start with what should I do. That's for me a default setting because I find it to be the most useful in conversation with these cards. But what should I do in my love life? We have the Fool and we have the Nine of Pentacles. The suggestion there would be that if you're going to take a big leap in your love life, if you're kind of going after something, maybe you're starting dating and you don't really know what to expect, and you feel excited, but you also feel terrified, then you need to ground that with times of comfort and solitude. You need to be able to be a good friend and relate well to yourself in order to have that big leap forward in your dating life. So we can see how these two cards act in relationship to each other and in relationship to the question. So we get these different layers of meaning. And if we are willing to step back and be thoughtful, what we can do is employ the part of our brains that tells a story, right? That says, okay, how do these disparate images work together to make a story? And that is also where our intuition comes in, because one reader may look at two cards and make a very different story. One reader might interpret the cards, the Fool and the Nine of Pentacles, very differently than how I just did, right? They might say the Fool and the Nine of Pentacles are in competition with each other and you need to choose one. And in that moment, that's the story that their brain is handing them, and it's not an invalid interpretation, right? We can't really do both things at once. And it may be that you do need to make a decision day to day. Is today a Fool day or is today a Nine of Pentacles day? And allow yourself to have a balance of those days. Another reader might interpret it in a way I can't even think of because I'm not them. So that's where our intuition can come into play, is the stories that we tell around the tarot card, much like I was talking about earlier when we pulled the Moon about a conversation we're having. It's a mix of our subconscious mind, our intuition, and whatever you believe feeds that. And us as a human being, right? How we interpret the card and what it is trying to tell us. It is a mix. It's a mix of us understanding and studying the tarot and our intuition connecting the dots and telling us a story. That is what makes a good reading. Hydration checkpoint, everybody. Now, we've talked about two card pulls in relation to each other. You can also use these two cards to represent different options if you're trying to make a decision. I don't recommend a one card pull. I recommend a two card pull. If you're choosing between two options. And I do often get people reaching out to me to make decisions, and they're like, can you pull a card for me? And I'm like, no, I'm pulling two. I just did this for a friend of mine like a few months ago, and they found it very helpful. They were choosing between you may be listening and watching right now, hi, between two different laptops, I think. And I was like, I'll play this game, but also please make your decision based on your brain, not just what Rorie the tarot reader says. That's my disclaimer always, like, don't turn your brain off and just do what the cards say. It's a mix. It's a mix of our intuition and the cards and our own brains. Anyway, there were two different cards pulled, and my intention when I pulled them was, here's what happens if you get this laptop, here's what happens if you get this one, right? So if you're trying to make a decision between two things, I love to pull a card, and we talked about it doesn't always have to be should I. We can say, what can I expect if I choose option A? And what can I expect if I choose option B? And this is helpful too, because often we have this tendency to like live very black and white in our lives and be like, I'm going to make the wrong choice and regret it forever. And often our choices like could both be good choices. You know what I mean? Or sometimes, unfortunately, we have to choose between two things that are not that great, and it's still important that we make the choice, because it beats not making the choice. When we don't make a choice, we allow ourselves to be chosen for. We give up our agency. So it's still worth making that choice. P.S. Please vote. It's even though we have such an imperfect system in these United States, please vote. It's still worth making a choice. And we can't always control what choices we're given. So it's like, okay, here are the two options I think I have. Choice A, what can I expect? If I make choice B, what can I expect? And I will lay out, if there's anyone making a choice right now who's listening to this, this is for you. I will lay out two cards. Choice A. Assign your choice A right now. Let me know, or let yourself know in your brain what choice A is. Here's what happens if we do choice A. Choice B. Here's what happens if we do choice B. Again, if you are physically making a choice right now, I really, really remind you, please use your brain and your insights and what you believe is best for you, not just do blindly what the tarot cards say, because, we should do that. We should make informed decisions. We should allow the tarot to be a wise advisor to us, and then we make our decision. That doesn't mean we have to do exactly what the tarot cards say. It means that we consider it as helpful guidance. Okay, choice A is the Eight of Cups. Choice B is the Nine of Swords. I'm not going to try to tell a story about this choice because I did invite you to use it as a reading if you're listening right now and trying to make a decision. So I will allow you to do some of this connecting of the dots. Choice A as the Eight of Cups. If you choose choice A, you will be walking away from something. That's what the Eight of Cups is about. It's about walking away from something. There's often disappointment here. There's often a little bit of heart hurt. We've tried to make something work in a variety of ways, and none of the ways we have tried have made it work. So we walk away. And when we walk away, inherently, it is a leap of faith because we don't know what we're walking to, right? When we close a door, it always is a bit scary because we don't know what we're doing instead. We just know we're walking into a future without this. I remember leaving a toxic job when I was, 21, 22, pretty young. And I left the job, truthfully, because I couldn't do it anymore. Like, it wasn't that it was a hard job, it was the personalities. And walking in there felt very toxic and uncomfortable. And it was like you could feel a heaviness in the air. Like, if you've ever been at like somebody's like family's like holiday dinner and you can feel all of the family discord and all the family stories and everyone's just like resentful of each other. I hope your holiday dinners aren't like this, or I hope most of them aren't. I think everyone's probably had that experience with their family or someone else's family of like, man, like the atmosphere is so tense you could cut it with a knife. There's so much going unsaid. There's so much resentment. That was the energy of that job. I couldn't work in that energy anymore. And I quit in a very ungraceful way. I drove in and I couldn't go inside. I like couldn't make myself get out of my car. And eventually I kind of like just called the office and told them I couldn't come in, or I think someone might have even come out to check on me. And, I was young. I was in my early 20s. I don't even remember how that conversation went, but it was a difficult time in my life, and that job was contributing. And I didn't know. I didn't know what I would do. I didn't know how I would provide for myself. After I left that job, I just knew I couldn't do it anymore, that I couldn't do one more day in this atmosphere because it was making me crazy. So much so that rather than making a thoughtful choice of like, I'm going to hand in my letter of resignation and give myself 2 weeks, instead I literally like put the brakes on that day and couldn't make myself go in. That's what the Eight of Cups is like. It's you realizing I just can't pursue this path anymore. I don't know what's next, but I know it's not more of this. That's the energy of the Eight of Cups. So that's what you're choosing if you choose choice A. You're choosing an uncertain future, but walking away from a current that is, not feeling good. Choice B is the Nine of Swords. Nine of Swords is about anxiety, and it is about the stories we tell ourselves. If you have had a difficult night sleeping because your brain is racing with so many what ifs, so many questions, all of your anxieties. I actually happened to have a night like this last night. I had like a couple of bad dreams where all of my kind of common fear stories just came out and were thrown at me by the universe. Then I woke up to go to the bathroom. I looked at my phone. Don't do it. Don't do this. I looked to see what time it is, but I saw that a text message had come in, and the text message itself stressed me out. So then I slept worse. Anyway, the reason I say this is not to complain about my night. I think everyone's had a night like that, where they're trying to get rest, and instead what happens is they just like kind of like have a long dark night of the soul and have their anxieties thrown at them. That is the energy of the Nine of Swords. You're so in your head. You're not, even though you are aware during such a night, and I'm interpreting this literally as a night where you can't sleep, but I think you know that this energy can carry over to different areas of our life, right? Even though focusing on all this stressful stuff in any way is not helping you, it's very hard for you to stop ruminating. And that may stop you from getting rest, stop you from doing some work you have to do, stop you from making a decision you have to make. That's the energy of the Nine of Swords. This is ruminating on what if, rather than having the practical conversation, doing the practical action. It's allowing your imagination to get carried away with you, not in a great way. Well, that is what choice B represents. I kind of personally know what I would choose out of those two cards if I were in such a situation. I'm not you. And this is an important thing for me as a tarot reader. I don't believe. Now, you're allowed to feel differently. I don't believe we as tarot readers, if we're reading for other people, I don't think we should dictate their lives to them. I don't think that's right. I don't think we have the full context. We have the context we're given in a conversation, and sometimes people are like, what should I do? And even then, I will, like if there seems to be very clear advice, I will share it, but I always want to temper it with, listen, I don't want you making a choice because Rorie the tarot reader said. I want you making a choice because you know in your heart it's the right choice for you, or it's the choice that you're able to make right now, right? Raise your hand if you've ever been in a situation where you know you should do one thing and you do the other. Raise your hand if you've ever been in a situation where you know you should do 8 of Cups and you do 9 of Swords. I have, like that's just life sometimes. Sometimes our path is that we take the hard road, and that just is how it is. And maybe it turns out to be a blessing and we learn things about ourselves, and maybe it's another fucking growth opportunity, as my friend likes to say, AFCO. At the end of the day, the person who should make decisions about your life is you. And if you are reading for someone, at the end of the day, the person who should make decisions about their life is them. We can tell them what we think might be best. We can tell them what we would do. But we should never, we should never like lay down the law for a person like that. We have to let people make their own opinions and choices. And I believe that if someone comes to me and says, what should I do? I'll do whatever I tell you. That I am enabling a very disempowered part of themselves if I say, okay, do this. I believe that when when someone comes to me like that, I really want to put the power back in their hands. I really want to say, look, here's what you can do. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I invite you to choose, I invite you to choose. And it's okay to choose even without all the information, to allow someone to make a real decision about their lives and themselves. So that's just a little, Tarot Ethics 101. Related, because we haven't talked about ethics, I'll have a little ethics segment right this minute. What do you read about? What do you not read about? Different readers have different answers to these questions. That's appropriate because different people are different. For me personally, I don't do medical readings. If someone's like, is it cancer? Oh God, I can't imagine the pain they're in coming to a tarot reader with that question. And also, I don't want to be the reason they don't get life-saving treatment if they need it. So I'm not going to ask the cards, is it cancer? I won't do it because I do not want to risk them making a decision based on what I said instead of what a qualified medical professional or a team of them say. That feels very unethical to me. I don't have a medical degree. I just look at the pretty pictures on the cards, as my friend Susanna from Anti-Fragile Tarot would say. I will, however, if this is the topic they need to talk about, if they're like, I might have a diagnosis, someone in my family might have a diagnosis, then the reading I am willing to do, and I'll communicate this to them, is how can we approach this situation? What is the best way to approach this difficult situation that you're in? I'll do a reading for them about that. Because what's the best way to approach this difficult situation is not medical advice. It's emotional, psychological, philosophical advice that should be done hand in hand with, also, please consult your doctor. Similarly, I don't do cards about pregnancies, which is a medical reading, although not everyone may think of it that way. It is. Being pregnant is a medical situation, right? It's a change in your body. I don't do cards about pregnancies because I don't want to be the reason, for whatever reason, that someone thinks they're pregnant or they're not pregnant, which is a life-changing piece of information. I'm like, go to your doctor, get a pregnancy test, or will I get pregnant if there's issues with infertility? The person to have that conversation with is a medical professional, and I don't want to be the one who creates a roadblock by putting an idea in someone's head. And, if it's a bad reading, right? Like, I'm just like giving you a what if here. If someone's like, will I become pregnant in the last year? We've been trying for 6 years, right? What if I get death? That reading could crush them. They may not be ready to hear that, And our job as a tarot reader is to help people lead empowered lives and make good decisions. There are people who believe that our job as a tarot reader is to tell it like it is, honey. And I happen to think that there's a lot of different ways that it is, honey. I think there's a lot of valid different perspectives on the same situation that can be had, especially in a tarot reading. And I think that people who think their idea is like, well, this is what the cards say, so this is what's happening, and really kind of like have that almost aggressive tone of like, I'm the tarot reader, I know what's up. I think they're missing the boat a little bit. And I don't think it helps their clients, especially if it's a negative reading. And I have seen people get very defensive about this, like, well, that's what the cards say. This is what you need to do. You need to break up with him. This is the cards, or whatever it is. And if a person is really not ready to make that choice, you might have just destroyed them. You might have set them back a few weeks rather than allowing them to make a more empowered decision or allowing them to take their time with a decision that they ultimately need to make. So this is not me saying ever be dishonest with your clients. It is me saying every conversation has a few ways it can go, right? When you are hurting and your heart is hurting and you go to a friend and you need someone to kind of give you advice, but mostly listen and hold your hand through a difficult time, do you want to go to the person who's like, well, you should do this. I told you should do this. I don't know why you're still coming back to me. Or do you want to go to the person who's like, listen, I'm here for you no matter what you do. Let's talk about it. And that's the kind of tarot reader I try to be. And we all make our choices. You may think my approach is wrong, and that's okay. The other ethical thing that I will not answer questions on is twin flames and soulmates. Personally, I don't know that I believe in either thing. If you believe in either thing, that's cool. And in fact, even more so, that means I definitely won't do a reading for you on that topic, because it's not for me to decide. If you're dating someone and you want to know if this person is your soulmate, is your twin flame, is meant to be with you forever, what if I say yes and that locks you into an abusive relationship with someone? What if I say no and then you lose a chance at an incredibly powerful relationship because Rorie the tarot reader said we're not meant to be? I just don't want to introduce myself into that conversation. Relationships are between the people they're in. Can I give you context and guidance? Can I pull cards for you about it? Yeah. Will I tell you whether someone is your twin flame? No, because I don't even know if I believe in a twin flame. But even if I did, that would be a question I wouldn't feel it was appropriate for me to ask. Now, other tarot readers may feel differently, and that's up to them, This is my personal set of ethics around reading the tarot. And over time, as you read for yourself and for others, you will develop your own personal set of ethics. I want to say that ethics also apply when you read for yourself. If you know, for example, we talked about the example, and I'll get back to reading spreads in just a moment. I know this is an accidental tangent, tarot ethics with Rorie. If you know that a reading might crush you, we talked about the example of that person who is trying to get pregnant, who has been seeking treatment for infertility, and who wants to know, will I get pregnant in the next year? Now, I know as a reader, I know all the possible cards that could come up. Some good cards could come up. The Empress might come up. I might make their day. But then, if they don't get pregnant in the next year, and the Empress came up, which is like generally considered to be a fertility card, well, they might be very upset. They might be like, I really thought it would happen. Or maybe they won't pursue the treatment that would make it happen because they're like, oh no, the tarot reader said we'll get pregnant, no worries. So then they don't get the treatment, then they don't get pregnant. Or what if death comes up? And like, how do you interpret that? I choose not to. I don't want to. But what if it does? Like, it could be a simple no. It could be a miscarriage. Those are things that if you're kind of hanging on by a thread for a journey you've been on for a very long time would be very hard to hear and could disempower you more than empower you. I don't want someone to leave my table crying in despair. I do have people cry at my table all the time, and it's very okay because my table is a safe place for people to experience their emotions. But I want my reading to help them feel a little more empowered about their situation rather than a little less. So, similarly, when you are reading for yourself, I'm going to ask you with love. If you know that certain cards could come up and crush you, this may not be the right time for you to read on that topic for yourself. And it may not be the right time to seek a reading from someone else on that topic. It's not even about, can I be objective? If you're pulling a card about a relationship and you know that certain cards will come up and break your heart, and you're not ready to deal with that. And also, if your heart's going to get broken in a relationship, it should be by you and the other person, not by the tarot cards, right? But if you know your heart might get broken by seeing the wrong card and that you might be devastated, then a reading isn't helpful in that moment. then that's just self-harm. You know, that's you choosing to kind of ruminate. That's kind of Nine of Swords energy. That's you choosing to kind of ruminate in the what ifs. It's like, I'm hoping for this, but I know this might happen, and if I get the right answer, it'll feel like I win the lottery. And if I get the wrong answer, it'll feel devastating, and anything in between. And that's a lot. That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of emotional pressure. And I would suggest to you at those times, when you know that the wrong card might devastate you, to not do a reading. Rather, if you know that the wrong card about this topic will devastate you, it's time to give yourself some emotional care in the form of not a tarot reading. If you do any reading at all, the tarot reading that you do should be, what do I do to care for myself right now in this difficult situation? Okay, TED Talk over. We're going to talk now about reading spreads. I talked about 1 and 2 card pulls. I dove a little bit into spreads by suggesting that we can assign different meanings to different cards. For example, the 2-card decision spread. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? Once you get a few more cards, you can do a lot. You can, and I know some very good readers who do this, choose to lay out a certain number of cards in a row and just read them as a story. I would say that is playing on hard mode. I would say if that speaks to you, do it. But I would say it's playing on hard mode, and it might be easier for you if you're a beginner to do a spread that has specific meanings, because more context helps us make better connections. But there are readers who do that, who say, like, I'm going to lay out 3, 5, 7 cards, whatever it is, a number that's meaningful to them perhaps, about this situation. They'll put some context, maybe or not, and I'll see if I can make a story. Let's do that right now. Here, this is not exactly a spread. It's more doing a big card pull, right? I'm going to do it with just 3 cards just to, like, kind of share what this make the cards tell a story method looks like, okay? So I'm just going to take the top 3 cards of my deck, and I'm going to turn on my camera so you can see them in order. Okay, 1, 2, 3. I wish I could actually zoom in a little bit for you. What we have is the King of Swords, 4 of Wands, and 9 of Wands. If I were to read these 3 cards as a story, first of all, we have to engage our subconscious and intuition to do that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but we do, because every card can have multiple different meanings. So if I look at the 3 together kind of in a clump, I'm like, okay, King of Swords, here's someone who's really by the book, someone who values their truth, someone who feels very strongly that there is an answer to every question if you look hard enough and consider all your options. He's at the 4 of Wands. So the King of Swords, whether it's you or someone in your life, is experiencing a celebration, a party, an experience of someone else having a milestone. And they're having thoughts about this because they're the King of Swords, right? This is a character-driven person. And we land at the 9 of Wands. So here's this King of Swords who's been trying to figure out his life, believes that there is an answer to every question, goes to the 4 of Wands, sees everybody having a wonderful time, and himself ends up feeling 9 of Wands, very overwhelmed and beaten down. Like, in his own life, he is not having those big milestones. He's just overworking and feeling stressed and feeling like he never gets a break. Like, he's watching everyone else take a break. Now, that's a story that came out of my subconscious in 30 seconds and probably says more about me than about a situation I might read for another person. And of course, I might, if I were doing such a spread for somebody else, be tapped into my intuition and deliberately try to involve their energy in the reading. Or have them lay out the cards, you know? Or ask them directly, what do you think about when you look at the King of Swords? Who does that look like to you in your life? Anyone? Or what do you think about when you think about the 4 of Wands? And sometimes I will say this is a useful, like, hot tip. If you're doing a reading for someone else or yourself and you're stumped on a card, ask them what they think about the card. Like, don't put anything on it, because this imagery is very powerful and people will start saying things, and that is the purest form of accessing our intuition, which I will talk to you more about in Which You Got This. But it also gives us some clues, right? If we're like, what does this card mean to you? First of all, it gives us a minute to be like, what does that card mean again? Secondly, it gives us some insight into their own emotional state around this reading. If they see the 4 of Wands and they're like, oh, everyone's having a good time except for me as usual, that's very different than them going like, oh, that's my cousin's wedding. I was just at a wedding last week. It was beautiful, right? And either might be what they see when they look at this card. there are so many interpretations. So if you do something like lay out 3 cards in a row, 5 cards in a row, however many cards in a row you want, and just try to kind of make a story out of them, you are using your intuition in order to do that. And there are other techniques you can look at to go deeper with that reading once you've kind of made a sentence. You could say, okay, are these figures turned away from each other or towards each other, indicating how they might or might not be interaction? I love doing this, is a sword pointing at anything, indicating like, this is important to the meaning of this card, where here, like, the sword is actually kind of, here the sword is actually kind of pointing to these 2 cats playing on the 4 of Wands. So if I was going to further interpret that, I'd be like, that's interesting, because it's like, it's almost as though the King of Swords is paying attention not to the main event, but to like small things happening on the sidelines. That's what's catching his attention. So that's interesting to me as a possible interpretation, right? And I might look also at the 9 of Wands and how this figure is turned away from every other figure, feeling like I just had to get away. Now, if we think about this as somebody who's kind of a very rational, logical person, a Spock type person, that's the King of Swords energy, is Spock. Someone like that going to a party and perhaps feeling overwhelmed because they couldn't connect with how everyone else was feeling in the moment that they themselves weren't feeling, and needing to just like turn away and find solitude. And that solitude wasn't restful. It was like, oh God, I need to recover, right? That's the 9 of Wands. That could be another way to interpret these 3 cards. You could have an interpretation of these 3 cards that's very different. And context matters. Again, if someone said to you, what's going to happen to me in the next week? Reading those 3 cards is different than if someone said to you, do you have any insight for me about why my marriage ended? You know, like it's very contextual. So when we don't give ourselves context of cards that have meanings and just say, I'm going to just try and find the story, we must rely on our intuition at least a little bit. And there are tips and techniques to help us do that, like looking at where swords are pointing, looking at who's turned towards each other. I did a whole bonus episode recently for my patrons on looking at the flow of water in a tarot spread and how that tells an emotional story. And I kind of like, and I don't mean to sound like I think I'm so great, but I blew my own mind, because that was just an idea I had. I was like, oh, let's see how this goes. And by the end of the episode, like, I was hooked. I'm like, wow, that's fascinating. That tells that's its own reading, you know? Which might be really useful for like someone who is seeking tarot to help them, you know, like on their emotional journey or on their healing journey, like, you know, from trauma or from recovery or whatever, like the flow of water as an emotional story. Anyway, there's a million different things you can choose to focus in on to help your intuition. But when you lay things out in a spread like this and say, let me tell a story, you're involving your intuition heavily. That's not negative. However, here's another question Rorie's going to ask you. Is it my intuition? Or is it how strongly I feel about this topic? Is it my intuition? Or is it that I have some preconceived beliefs about this topic that I can't get around? Is it my intuition, or is it internalized misogyny, right? Because our intuition is connected to our subconscious, and guess what? Our subconscious has all that other stuff in there too. Our subconscious also has internalized misogyny, internalized racism, internalized homophobia, like internalized whatever shit we don't want, right? But does happen as we live in this culture. It also has all the beliefs that we got from our parents while we were growing up about how to have a relationship, about how to run your financial life, about how to be a person, some of which we probably consciously agree with and some of which we don't, but might be a form of self-sabotage for us, right? Our subconscious also holds our trauma. It also holds the part of ourselves that we don't want to acknowledge. If we're someone who's like, I don't get angry, guess what, babe? All your anger's in your subconscious. And it might come out during the tarot reading, and it might masquerade as your intuition. And so I say this to you, not to say don't rely on your intuition, but if you are going to truly seek your intuition as a big part of your tarot reading, it always has a component. There's a spectrum, right? There are people who are purely intuitive tarot readers who don't ever study the cards, who are just like, I look at the pictures on the cards and my intuition tells me. And there are people who study the tarot very, very seriously and do not feel that they are putting their intuition into it at all. They're simply using their studied and accumulated knowledge to go deeper. And there are people, at every spot in between on that spectrum. And you will be somewhere on that spectrum. And there's no right or wrong place to be. Part of what makes you special as a tarot reader is how you engage with that spectrum and how you choose to engage with both your intuition and your knowledge of the cards. So I'm not telling you what to do. I am saying that if you're going to use methods that really do rely on your intuition, I'm going to recommend, first of all, it not be a subject that's near and dear to your heart. If it's your aunt, um, this is really funny. I'm in StreamYard and I'm broadcasting. I don't know if people can see it. And I'm using my thumb to indicate like a point, and StreamYard thinks I'm giving it a thumbs up. If you're just listening to the podcast, this is what's happening on the video, and I think it's funny. Anyway, tangent, squirrel. If you're being asked a question about like what your aunt should do at her work, it might be a great time to use your intuition if you don't have a horse in that race. If you're like, I don't really care what happens with my aunt's work. Like, I want her to be happy, but I'm not, like, this is not a big emotional issue that keeps me up at night. You know what I mean? Whereas, if you're asking a question about whether your best friend should get a divorce, and you really feel strongly about the answer to that question, your intuition may be blocked by your big, strong feelings about it, right? Like, your intuition, it's about subconscious, it's about the energy around you. It can be difficult to discern what is intuition versus what is my big strong feelings versus what is my kind of like accidental programming, like cultural programming. You know what I mean? If you're asking about a topic that you know you yourself struggle with, your own struggles on that topic may come out. Now, you can be conscious of that and be like, okay, I have some blind spots here, so acknowledging them helps. You know what I mean? But my big takeaway with intuition is that when we are faced with an area where we have a big blind spot, trying to tap into our intuition at that point is not that helpful because we don't know what we're getting. It's more helpful to be kind to ourselves around that blind spot. So if you want to practice your intuition, this is a great way to do it. If you just want to grow your intuition, I would say do it over low stakes readings. I had a student who I had read about football games, and the student knew nothing about football. And that was what made it really good. And she gave some incredible readings. And the reason I would have this is because my husband is a big Patriots fan. He watches football every week during the season. Sometimes he stops if the Patriots are doing really poorly. But point being, he's watching games. He's very invested. He's the reason I understand how football works. He taught me, and now I can enjoy watching a football game because I'm not just looking at like guys on a field throwing a ball and getting intense about it. I like understand what's happening, and it's funny how once you understand something, it becomes a little more engaging. But anyway, she knew nothing about football, and she wanted to practice reading and interpreting the cards. And I was like, so let's not make this about topics that are dear to your heart. Tell me about like how things are going to go with the Colts game today. And she was like, I have no idea. And I'm like, exactly. That's why it's a good reading for you to just practice your tarot skills. And what was cool is I would have her, that was her homework. And she'd come back and be like, here's the 3-card reading I did about the Colts game. And here's what I think happened. And I recommended to her like that she assign, I was not having her do a straight reading like this of just like 3 cards. I think it might have been past, present, future, or it might have been, here's the topic of the reading. You know, subject, action, result is a 3-card reading I love. Like, here's the subject of the reading, here's what happens, and here's the result, right? For example. Anyway, she was using a set 3-card spread like that. And she gave a reading that was very, very, she like just did her best with it because she didn't understand football. So she's like, well, I don't know. The person, it was like Knight of Wands or something. It was like, she was like, I get the sense from him that like he really like kind of has a little bit of an ego and he's been good at this historically, but he hasn't been, you know, maybe doing this long, but he's kind of like the hometown hero. Like that's kind of her, that was her interpretation of the Knight of Wands that day, you know? And then something is going to happen that is surprising and takes the wind out of his sails. I don't remember what card that was, maybe the tower. And then, however it's all going to work out, like the sun was the final card. I don't remember if that was the exact reading, but that was the gist. And she was like, I don't know what any of this means. I wouldn't even, if I watched the game, I literally wouldn't know if I was right or wrong. Well, my husband's a big fan, and he was watching the games because the Colts were playing the Patriots or something. And what happened was a receiver who had been doing very, very well in his career and was kind of new to the game and was like a big, you know, like rising star, hurt his ankle in the game. And like he didn't make it through the game. But then the team won anyway. So she gave this incredibly interesting, accurate tarot prediction for a football game she knew nothing about. And so that's also interesting because it speaks to, if you read for other people and sometimes yourself, you don't always know whether your reading is going to land. If someone's like, what's going to happen in the next 6 months? You don't actually know if you're like, what's going to happen or not happen in your reading. If someone, especially, you'll get clients who come to your desk with a poker face, people who are like, I don't want to tell you anything because I don't want you to like cold read me. I want, like, I want to know if this is real or not. And I happen to think that energy is not very helpful. And that's not how I approach the tarot. But you get them. You get clients who are just like, I'm not going to give you anything. You tell me, and they're stony faced. And you don't know how your reading is landing. And at that time, we have to trust ourselves. We have to develop a trust in ourselves. We have to develop a way to lay out the cards and tell a story and trust that our methodologies and our intuition are leading us on the right path, because they're not giving us anything back. And in a way, that is a purer form of doing a reading, right? Because I think we can't help it as humans. If I start to interpret a card a certain way and I see my client go like they're excited, it's hard for me emotionally as a human being not to respond to that, not to want to make them happy. You know what I mean? Or to not disappoint them. And so if you have someone who's kind of giving you nothing, it's almost a purer reading. It's almost like allows you to just make it a reading rather than a combination of reading and conversation, where there's always some element of, some investment in how we want the conversation to go. I've dropped another card. Y'all, I'm not calling this a jumper. I'm sitting in a weird position to do this podcast, and I'm bad at shuffling. So let's spend just a couple minutes on spreads. This has been a long thing, and we are going to do Witch You Got This. And that's going to be some techniques we can use when we're stumped on a card. But let's talk about doing a spread. Essentially, when we do a tarot spread, and if you are a patron, your bonus episode will be how to make your own tarot spread. One that is custom tailor-made for the situation that you're in. I don't think that's always necessary, although I do think it's fun. And I certainly have done this as a reader, where someone will come to me. I'm famous for saying this. Like, a client will say, I need a reading, but I don't know what I need. And I'm just like, give me a brain dump. And if there is not a reading that I already do or have already made that presents itself to me, I will make one up for their situation. And I feel competent to do that after years of study. And like, I can like do that in a way that's functional for me. If you're a patron, I'll be showing you how I do that, because it's not hard, but it is something that kind of like naturally was easy for me after years of study. And it doesn't have to take that course for you. It can, there's a simple method to do it. However, there's so many spreads out there. If you like Google tarot spread for relationships, tarot spread for money advice, whatever, or some of the classic spreads, the horseshoe spread is one that's kind of a classic form. The Celtic cross spread is kind of a classic form. Both of those spreads, by the way. And when I say spread, I just mean a specific pattern of laying out the cards with meanings assigned to each card. Both of those spreads, you'll get different tarot readers who read them differently, and like that's the way it's read, right? Like there are a few different ways to do a horseshoe reading, probably ways I don't know of, and it's not a spread I work with too often. But you get tarot readers who like that's their spread, that's their go-to, and they'll do a horseshoe, and they have the reading so ingrained in their mind, and maybe it's even evolved from how they learned it, because they're like, oh, I found that when I do this in this position, it makes such a big difference to my understanding of the reading, whatever. No two people read it the same way. And the Celtic cross is the same way. Most readers learn the Celtic cross at some time. And I'm going to lay out a Celtic cross, but not interpret it for you in this, because I just don't want to do so for time, but I'm going to lay it out for you to understand the meanings and how they interact. Because that's a classic spread, and many people read a Celtic cross, and it's in the back of most like little white books that come with your tarot deck, or like most tarot books have a section on the Celtic cross, and every single one's a little bit different. The placements are just a little bit different. I know that the way I do a Celtic cross, and grew up doing it over the years, is different from how a majority of people do it. So when I teach you, I'm going to show you a Celtic cross, and I'm going to tell you it's not the only way to do one, and you don't have to do it the Rorie way. And also, if you find a spread you really like, but you're like, oh, but if only this was different, guess what? You're the reader. You can tweak it. It's fine. No one's gonna like the tarot police aren't gonna come to your door. you can find spreads, and you can, like, the internet is lousy with tarot spreads. It's a wonderful resource. Go on Pinterest, go on Instagram. You will find, you'll even find accounts that, like, specifically post tarot spreads regularly. The Tarot Nerds account is great for that. You'll find awesome, like, very specific spreads, sometimes, like, specific for the winter solstice, or specific for Mercury retrograde, or sometimes, like, specific to, like, I have to have a difficult conversation spread. And that's great. You know, like, you can find a very specific spread by Googling tarot spread for, you know, followed by whatever you're looking for. Or you can just kind of browse around and do what feels interesting to you. Or you can make a custom spread, and if you're a patron, I will be teaching you how. But I'm going to talk to you about the Celtic Cross because it is a classic spread. Everyone reads it a little bit differently. Everyone lays it out a little bit differently because it's such a, it is that type of, like, living tradition that every tarot reader kind of has their own little quirks about how they do it. I know I have mine. I know what I'm about to show you isn't the exact same Celtic Cross you'll find, like, in the back of a book or something. And I'm here to tell you that's the way I read it. And that matters when you're a reader. Setting the intention of, this is how I will read this spread. And the intention can be, I will read the spread exactly as the book taught me because that's comfortable for me and that allows me to not have to worry about it, is a great intention. I'll read the spread to the letter the way I was taught is a great intention to have. If the intention is, I'm going to read this spread and this card placed here means this when I do it, well, then that's how you do the spread now. And your intuition and the cards can work together to, you know, like, that's the intention. Like, as Jean-Luc Picard would say, make it so. Like, that's the way you make it so. You just say so. As a tarot reader, you set the intention, and that becomes the framework for your reading. So let's get into the Celtic Cross. I'm just going to lay out a Celtic Cross. I'm not even going to turn over the cards. No, I will, just because I will. So the first card to Celtic Cross is a card that represents the questioner. Some people choose this card. Some people use a significator card, which I'm not going to get too deep into, but that would be a card that you deliberately choose by looking through the deck and saying, your significator is whatever, the Knight of Pentacles. If the person is like, I want to develop my career, someone may deliberately choose the Knight of Pentacles as a significator. I personally don't like to work with significators because I want to let the card that is chosen come up naturally, and I can't do that if I've removed it from the deck. That's my personal take, but you might feel differently. It still can interact with other cards in the reading. It still can be very meaningful. Some people choose a significator based on physical characteristics or based on astrology. If someone's like an earth sign and young, they might choose the Knight of Pentacles again. I don't choose, in my decks, in my reading, I don't choose a significator. Someone might place a significator here on purpose. Again, the difference is a significator is something you specifically choose on purpose for the reading, not something that is randomly selected after shuffling. Some people might put the significator down and then also put a randomly selected card on top of it. You do you. You do what feels right to you in your readings. I'm just giving you options. But the first card here always represents the questioner, where they're at in regards to this issue. Remember, everything is always about context. Card 1 in a Celtic Cross is a questioner and where they're at. Card 2 is what's crossing them. Now, important, crossing sounds negative to a lot of people, and the way to think about the crossing card is what is crossing your path. That doesn't mean it's positive or negative. It can be negative. It can also be positive, right? If winning the lottery crosses your path, if a winning lottery ticket crosses your path, that's great. You know, it doesn't have to be positive or negative. It's just the energy around you. Here's you and here's what's crossing your path, right? Here's what's showing up in your life. This is where I start to diverge. I then lay out the top card as card 3, bottom card as card 4, and then card 5, and then card 6. Different traditions will lay out these cards in different orders and interpret them somewhat differently. I will share my interpretations, and you are welcome to use them. You are also welcome to go with the interpretation in a book you love, or from a reader or an author you love, or an interpretation that makes more sense to you, like in your brain graphically. You're welcome to interpret it how you do. But these are like kind of the base cards in the Celtic Cross. Card 3 for me, crowning card, the card on top. When I say something crowns you, I look at it as an advice card. The crowning card is the best you can achieve with the situation. This is the best you can be. This might be advice from your highest self. Roots. Some people refer to this as the distant past. This is the card that has the roots of the situation, and it's helpful, first of all, visually. Crowning, roots, there's a, like, it's the up, it's the down of the spread, right? There's a way to kind of interpret that. Roots of the situation. This can be helpful for understanding what a situation is rooted in. If somebody's like, I'm asking about my marriage today, right? And the roots of the situation might give us an idea of how their marriage came together, what their relationship is founded on, for example, you know, why they got married to this person. Or the roots of this situation might be an incident within their marriage that has prompted this reading, right? Well, 6 months ago we found out this and it's changed our relationship. That might be the roots of this reading. And you know that by context, you know, like a reading, especially for another person, is a conversation. But roots indicate the roots of the situation or the distant past. We then have a card here behind the querent to represent the more recent past. Now, that means that the distant past, recent past, and current past tell a story. Here's a 3-card past, you know, into present spread, right? So we can then say, here's what happened in the distant past, here's what set this thing in motion, here's what's happened more recently, and here's where you are now. So recent past is kind of like what's just behind you. This card is useful also for like just checking ourselves, you know what I mean? It's useful for getting buy-in from yourself and the querent to be like, okay, so here's what you've been experiencing, or have you been experiencing anything like that? And when we ask these questions, we can get a little more clarity on the definition of the card. We might be like, sometimes this card means this, and they're like, well, that's kind of like what happened to me. Here's what happened, and then we have some great context, you know, and that can inform the whole rest of the reading. This, if you read it the way I do, which is I lay out querent card, crossing card, and then crowning, roots, past. I'm back here. I land back at the querent card, and I can read these 3 cards across as a past, present, future spread. The final card here that is placed here is the near future. So you can see these 3 cards, recent past, present, near future. There is a past, present, future spread, 3-card, common 3-card spread baked into the Celtic cross. So that's very interesting. In fact, you could, if you so desired, lay out a 3-card past, present, future spread, which is a very common beginner spread that people use, and then build a Celtic cross around it if you wanted more context. You could do that. So anyway, we've now gotten a really good grounding of the situation, right? Here's where you're at. Here's what's crossing your path right now. These 2 cards are, of course, related, near future and what's crossing your path right now, right? Here's the roots of the situation. Here's what's happened recently. And here's what's coming up next. And we also have the crowning card. And the crowning card, again, is like, who's the best you to bring to this situation? How can you, you know, be your best self in this situation? What's the highest good? What's the best advice? That's what the crowning card is for. So all of this stuff is like, here's how stuff is. And this is, here is an aspirational card telling you what your highest self would want from you. Okay. Now, that's the first half of the Celtic cross. You could lay that out as its own spread, and you could see it gives a lot of context about a situation. But most of the time with a Celtic, I call that the mini cross. I don't know if everyone calls it that, but like this is the starter for the Celtic cross. Usually in a Celtic cross, 4 additional cards are laid out along the side like this, kind of as a, in a line. Usually this card would go here, but it's off the screen and off my piano bench, so I'm just putting it here. I'm doing my best here. I'm just like crunching these cards together. So the meanings of these 4 cards, again, this is something that varies for different people. This card on the bottom puts the querent in perspective again. So it relates to this first card. The first card is, who are you right now? What's happening right now? This card puts you in perspective. So consider that. And I'll do a tiny bit of reading just so you understand. The querent here is the King of Pentacles. The person in this situation is feeling very stable and in charge of their resources. This is an area of leadership for them. In perspective, we have the 3 of Pentacles, which suggests that now this person who feels very stable and like used to being in charge of this part of their lives is in collaboration with other people. We can absolutely imagine how that might upset the apple cart a little bit. That person is probably having some feelings about it. Either they're calling in someone who knows more than them, or they are the person who has been called in as an expert. So it's more information about the querent. and also gives you some ideas about their state of mind. This next card is about what is around you. This card can have different meanings at different times. And you may choose one and run with it, or you may look for context, which is what I tend to do now. It may mean how people perceive you. It may mean what's going on in your community broadly. It may mean like, here's like a B storyline. You know what I mean? Like, you're going through all this, but here's something else that's happening around you. You know, like, okay, well, you came asking me about, for example, your marriage. And related to this, you have a friend whose marriage is also in a weird situation, and, you know, like, I'm not even looking at the card, but, you know, like, and this is affecting you, right? So, or like, well, related to this, like, you know, your kid's about to leave for college, you're about to be empty nesters, that's affecting you. I don't know, right? The point being, like, this card represents something that's kind of adjacent to the story, but has an effect, or can be, I kind of look at it as like the community environment card. What is your environment like that's affecting you, or how does your community affect you, or how does your community see you? Sometimes this card can mean people around you. This card is strength. If I took that to mean how do people around me see the querent, well, they see the querent as someone who's very strong and always like has it together, right? That's kind of like how someone might see someone who is embodied by strength. And that can be a really interesting conversation starter in a reading, because the reality of how someone is in perspective versus how their community sees them, like, can tell a big story, and is often something that becomes an important conversation if you're reading for yourself or someone else, honestly. This card, the penultimate card, second to last card, is about your inner landscape, about your inner feelings. What are you feeling under the hood, either subconsciously or consciously, but you're not sharing it with anyone, you know, like, so what are your inner feelings about this? And I will say this can be difficult to interpret because it's kind of broad, you know. I like to leave this as one card. I have a friend, and I will mention her by name because she has a great podcast. It's called Anti-Fragile Tarot. Susanna from Anti-Fragile Tarot always puts two cards in this position side by side, hopes and fears. And so it's like, it gives you sides to the light and dark of somebody's mental state. So it's still about your inner emotions. One card is about your hopes and what you're hoping for, and one card is about what you're afraid of or you don't like about the situation. And for her, that adds a lot of context. And as I said, everyone reads the Celtic Cross a little differently. So I'm not telling you how to read it. You will evolve as a reader to find what works for you. You don't have to even decide right now. You can play with different variations of it, and I suggest you do, and see what leaves you feeling like, that makes me feel kind of stumped, and see what makes you feel very empowered as a reader, and you should choose the ones that make you feel empowered. There's no points for playing on hard mode. The final card is called the Outcome, and that is in some ways like a very predictive, you know, kind of spread. Usually the way people look at this card is, if you follow the advice given to you in this spread, here's where you land. Or if you continue on your current trajectory, here's where you land. Now, this card can be a big card, so how you approach it can be tough, because if this is, it's funny, the Eight of Cups is where we landed in this spread, and that's come up earlier in this episode, but I'm not interpreting this spread. This card is a future card, and it's a little bit telling someone, here's where you land, here's what's coming, here's what's going to happen. And that emotionally is a lot, especially if you get a card that's kind of scary or kind of negative to people. That can be pretty overwhelming. But like, I've had it happen where someone gets like the Death card or the Tower in that spread. And actually, like, death in that position is not necessarily super negative. It means there's a definite ending, and what it means is that this will come to the end of its chapter and reach its ending, and we cannot know what's behind the next door until you complete this chapter of your life. Like, it's not necessarily negative, but nobody, like, no client has ever sat down and been like, I hope I get death in my future. You know, like, it's a tough card. And the Tower, of course, is a card of like chaos and stress. So most people don't love that as a future card. However, I will say, both cards, I've gone through those moments in my life. We all have. And they can be incredibly transformative, and they're like, they're crappy to go through, you know, like, you don't feel in the moment, you're like, another fucking growth opportunity, but when you get out of it, they are transformative. And for me, I've been through a few of those Death or Tower moments in my life, and I wouldn't take them back. Now on the other side of them, and even when I was going through them, it was like, okay, this is a very, very hard time, but I'm growing and I'm transforming my life, and this is what has to happen, you know, and sometimes it is like for the best. Anyway, tangent. This card is really looked at as like the outcome card. I don't want to put too much importance on this card. The whole story and context matters, as does how the querent, whether it's you or someone you're reading for, feels about all of it, right? We have this advice card. Here's your highest self. Well, already, like, there's a lot of ways to interpret different advice cards. And also, like, frankly, you're going to get times when yourself or someone you're reading for is not ready to take that advice. When you're like, thanks, but no thanks, you know? And that's life. That's how it is sometimes. And sometimes it's against our better judgment, or sometimes the tarot is telling you something and you're like, no, I can't do that. It would be against my better judgment to do what the tarot says in this situation, and that's always your prerogative. We have to make our own choices. So that's important to me. That's an important perspective I bring to reading a spread. I don't like to read the spread and be like, here's how it is, here's how it's going to be, honey. Have a great day. I don't like to be a purely predictive reader. I like to be a let's have a conversation, let's have you leaving with some empowered choices reader. And I think that any spread can help you do that if you've selected a spread that's useful, that has useful information in it, you know, and interpret it through that lens, not of like, here's how it's going to be, but of like, you know, let's get empowered and make empowered choices based on this context, right? Okay, I'm going to clean up this spread. I have dropped yet more cards on the floor. I don't know. It's like they're just flying out everywhere. Oh, this is a lot of tarot cards. I hope I didn't lose any. I don't even remember dropping them. Y'all, it's Mercury's in the microwave. I'm going to clean up this spread. We're going to go into which you got this. And I am going to give you some steps to take when you are stumped by a card, whether you're reading for yourself or you're reading for someone else. Now, if you're reading for someone else and you're at the point where cards stump you frequently, that's probably a disclaimer you want to make, right? Like, I'm new to this, I enjoy reading it, but I'm not like a professional, you know, like I might be checking my book, you know? You probably want to let people know that. If you're reading, and often this happens like between friends, or, you know, like as a tarot reader is learning, they'll be like, can I read for you? You know, that's a thing that happens. Hang on, hydration checkpoint. If you're reading for yourself, of course, you already know the level that you're at. You don't have to make any kind of disclaimers. So a card comes up and you're stumped by it. Let's talk about how we then interpret it. And I also want to talk about what it means to be stumped, right? Because sometimes a card comes up and you're just like, oh, don't remember the meaning of that card. And I will share, most readers, I think, even as they gain more and more experience, still have one or two cards that, like, they're just like, I can never really connect with that card. And it's different cards for different people. For me, for a long time, it was temperance. And you have now, if you listen to this podcast regularly, you've heard my rant on temperance and how balance is a verb, not a status. You know, like it's something you are continuing to do to better your life rather than a state of balance that you reach. You've heard that rant from me. But before I developed that rant, because I feel so strongly about that, temperance was not a card I could relate to. I'm like, balance? Like, okay. Like, I'm also someone who doesn't lead what many people would consider a balanced life or want to. I am a, you know, full-time creative person, and I've really made my career my life in a lot of ways, and I love it, and not everyone would be happy about that, you know? And so that kind of, like, for me, the traditional, like, you know, suggestions of how to balance your life may not apply and may not be for my highest good. So maybe that's why for a long time, temperance was the card that I get that card and be like, like, how do I contextualize this? So as you continue to read, you'll probably find your cards that you're just like, I can't connect with this. And what's very annoying is what'll happen is you will find that you'll have those cards and you'll be like, I can't connect with this. And you'll maybe say that to another reader and they'll be like, oh, well, it just means this. And you're like, yeah, I know, but I still can't connect with it. And that happens, and that's normal. And that can happen years into your reading. And sometimes a card will keep coming up for you and you'll be like, why? Like, I know what it means, but I don't know why. Why you follow me around? You'll get a stalker card. Why, though? And usually because you're meant to have a deeper relationship with that card. Anyway, Let's say you're stumped by a card. Perhaps as a beginner, you're stumped by looking at a card and you're like, no clue, do not remember what that card means whatsoever. But you want to stretch yourself rather than just like looking it up in the little book. You want to develop that ability to read during a reading rather than your reading being like card, look up thing, card, look up thing, which is fine, by the way. But I think that's what most people do when they first get a tarot deck, and then they learn to read the tarot because they want to have more of a connecting the dots conversation with the tarot than just, like finding the thing in a reference book and looking at the card. And, like that's a little bit rote. So you're stumped by it. I'm going to suggest that your first question to yourself, let's say you're doing this reading for yourself, is what is this? What do you see on the card? This is advice that came from my grandmother, not me. My grandmother, when I first got my first deck when I was very young, and it was like one of the only conversations we had about reading the tarot because she left us when I was 13. She said, say what you see. That is how to read the cards. You say what you see. So if you're stumped by a card, say, and I recommend doing it out loud as though you're talking to someone, even if you're alone, say what you see. Here's the Wheel of Fortune, another card that can stump people. Here's the Wheel of Fortune. Say what you see. I see a woman, she's got a wheel. On the wheel are a lot of different things, and only one of these things is going to happen, and we don't quite know what it's going to be, because that's literally how the Wheel of Fortune works. And here it's like, she's doing the Vanna White thing, and it's like, we know that something is coming, and it's probably something good, but we don't really know what it is yet. Anything could happen. That's what I get when I just describe the card to myself. And guess what? That's a pretty good interpretation of the Wheel of Fortune, right? We know something is coming. We don't know what is probably good. That is a very valid interpretation of the Wheel of Fortune. So often, if you have a student or a client asking them, what does this card mean to you? You'll be surprised sometimes at what great answers you'll get. And that's, you can ask yourself, say what you see. If you're reading for a person, you can simply literally say what you see. If you don't want to break the flow of the reading and get out the book, you can begin describing the card. This will never be out of flow for a reading. This allows the person to ground themselves in the imagery of the card, which is just what you are doing, and it allows them to engage with the reading in a deeper way. And it also shows the work a little bit, right? As a reader, if you're like, well, we have the Nine of Cups, so I see that, you're experiencing a time when you're like self-satisfied in your life or whatever. That actually doesn't give as much connection as if you say, well, we can see from the position of the person on the card and from the way these cups are stacked behind her and the peaceful attitude that she has, that she is experiencing this sense of self-satisfaction in a positive way, like being centered within herself, not like negative self-satisfaction. And when we describe a card to a reader or to a client in that way, that actually becomes more engaging for them. That's a way for them to connect deeper with the reading and have some insight into what we're doing. It's like showing the work when you do a math problem. And it allows them also, it helps their memory. Because if you sit down at a table and someone pulls maybe a Celtic Cross, which is a 10-card spread for you, you're not going to go home and remember every card in that spread unless you have a photographic memory or you take a photo. But it will help their memory when you point out the symbolism and say, here's what these cups mean. Here's what it means that she's sitting like this. Here's how that connects to your life. Those things interact with different parts of a person's brain, and they're more likely to take away more from the reading. So it's actually useful and helpful to describe a card to a querent. It's a good tip if you're stuck on the meaning of a card, and also it helps make the reading better, even if you're not stuck. You can also, if you are reading for someone, ask them to describe the card for you. This might give you some really interesting insight. This says, sometimes change the way I look at a particular card for my life. And it also, like, it's like a Rorschach test, right? Because there are times you say, what does this card look like to you? And they'll do what I just did. They'll just kind of like, well, I see a woman doing this, and I'll see a woman doing this, and their brain will start naturally telling a story. Like, so I guess this is what's happening, and this is what we can expect. And there will be times when they surprise you with some very particular insights. Like, they'll be like, oh, that's my sister and she's yelling at me. And you're like, okay, we know exactly what that card means now. Like, we can bypass everything I think this card means. That's your sister and she's yelling at you. And knowing the meaning of the card may help. In fact, hearing that might help you remember the meaning of the card, but knowing the meaning of the card may help you add context or may be unnecessary at that point, because that's what it means for your querent that day. That's very more meaningful. That's important. That is, if anything is bringing their energy into the reading, it's that, right? So ask yourself and ask, if you're stumped on the bare level meaning of a card, ask yourself and ask the reader or the person you're reading for to describe the card to you. And this will always help. You may not know how, like, it, you know, like, it may help in terms of, like, literally jogging your memory, or it just may help in terms of, like, that allows me to contextualize the card right now, you know? If you're reading for yourself or you're reading in a casual format where it's, like, comfortable to do so, you can also go to the book after that point. And I recommend doing so after, because our subconscious and our intuition, like, let's allow that to do its thing unfettered, and then go to the book. And it doesn't mean you're testing yourself. You're not reading the book and being like, oh, I was wrong, it's this. You're reading the book and being like, another way to look at it is this. Now you have two perspectives about the card, and those two perspectives can help you hone in on the context of this reading. What if you are looking at a card and you're stumped not on the meaning of the card, but what the hell it means in context? That's what used to happen to me with temperance, you know? I wouldn't, like, look at the card and be like, you know, like, I don't understand what this card means. I'd look at it and be like, how does this apply? Right? As you know, I now have lectures about temperance. It's funny, like, the cards that we stumble on most can then become the cards that we develop a very big philosophy about. You will evolve in your relationship to the cards as a reader. That I can promise you. And different cards will come forward as being important to you in different times in your life, and that's right, and that's like a part of your own journey as a human, honestly, and it's like, it enriches it, in my opinion. So let's say you're looking at a spread and you see a card that's so out of context, you know, maybe someone's asking about, like, what they should do in their career, and you see a card, and the card is, for example, the Lovers, and you're like, is this a romance reading? Right? That's actually a common thing, is to get stuck on the meaning of what we believe the card to mean and forget the context of the question. So this is important. When you're stumped in context, remember all of your context. Remember the context of what you or the querent asked you. If their question was, you know, what do I do in my career? I want to change my career up. I want to grow in the next 6 months. What should I do? That's context. Then we have the question of where the card lives in the spread. If it's a one card pull, what question did we ask when we pulled the card? If the card was like, what can my querent do? Well, then it's clear that this is, like, basically a general advice card of, like, how to act. If the context in the spread is like, okay, this is in the community sector, this is how people see you, or this is what's going on in your community, that's a different type of context. And if the context in the spread is like, this is your roots of your situation, that's another different context, right? And the Lovers in those three different contexts can mean three different things. Remembering the first context, if all we have to go on is the reader wants to know what they can do in their career, and the answer is the Lovers, then the answer that comes out of my mouth is, you need to get married to your career a little bit. Like, this needs to mean as much to you as a long-term relationship, because you are going to have to live with it long-term. And so you need to love it. Don't make moves in your career that you settle for. Make moves in your career that you're, like, wowed by. Make moves in your career that you want to propose to because you're obsessed with it. That is how to approach your career for the best. Now, if that same card is in a different context in the spread, if it's the Lovers, and I'm like, the Lovers, what does that have to do with career? And it's in the community spread. Okay, my question is, are they in business with someone they love? That could be relevant. Or is someone in their community a freelancer who is, like, fallen in love with their work and they envy that? Or do people see them as being so deeply in love with their work, which isn't necessarily true, but maybe that's how people see them. And if it were, for example, in the past, the Lovers, okay, that could mean that your focus used to be romance and relationships and now it's career. It could mean that you used to want to have a career with someone you love or with something that you love, and now you've evolved your understanding of it. But when we're stumped, so what's the technique that I'm getting at here? The technique is to go back over your context. When you're looking at the card and you're like, what the hell does this mean? You describe the card, or you ask the querent to describe the card. When you're like, what the hell does this mean in the context of this spread? We go back over the context. We describe the card so that we have that reminder for ourselves of what the card means. And we go back to our context. Our context may be, the first context is the question we asked. when we pulled the card, the question that we asked for the spread or for the card in particular. The next layer of context is, where is the card in the spread? Is it a standalone card, just meant as a single answer to that question? There you go. Or is it, like a detail within a spread, and that place that it is means something. And the next question is what's around the card. The next question is the context of what is around it. Can I tell a story? We talked about how the Celtic Cross has a past, present, future spread embedded into it. When you read a spread, there is a flow to it. And also, you will see connections between different cards. And I tried to mention without being too overwhelming, I tried to mention during the Celtic Cross, this card's related to that card, right? Card represents the querent, but this card puts the querent in perspective, right? This card is what's crossing the querent's path, and this is what's in the near future, and those two things might be the same thing or might be related or part of the same story, right? So we look at helper cards. We look at what's around the cards to see if we can tell a story, and kind of it's like a fill-in-the-blank question, right? So if, for example, we have past, present, future, and the Lovers is the past, and maybe present is death, and maybe future is like Eight of Cups. But this is a career spread, right? If that's a relationship spread, I bet you already know how to read it. If it's a relationship spread, it's like, all right, we were in love and it didn't work out, and there's an ending, and it's happening right now. We're breaking up, and now I'm moving forward into this new part of my life, like leaving this thing behind. Well, how would you tell that same story, but in a career context? Maybe you had a job you absolutely loved and it ended. Maybe you got fired, maybe you had to leave, whatever, it ended, and now you're moving forward and you're a little bit adrift. Okay, that's what the Lovers means that day in that career context. So just context is your best friend. Look at the cards around it. They will give you clues. Allow it to be a part of the story. Allow it to fill in the blank. That is what to do if you are stumped by a card. Okay? Okay. Friends, usually at the end of a broadcast, I share a song with you, and I'm not going to today, because we've already this is almost a 2-hour broadcast. This is going to be a long thing. This doesn't mean I'm going to stop sharing music with you, but today I'm going to just let this be enough, and I'm going to just give you a sign off and say thank you for being a part of this. This has been a big podcast. I think by now you know this about me. If I talk about a topic, I'm going to do the deep dive. There will be the occasional tangent. And we're going to really look at something deeply in a big way. I'm not going to give you the 101 version. So I hope this was helpful. Whether you're an experienced reader or a brand new reader, I hope this was helpful. Next month, we'll be finishing up this series, and we'll be talking about stumbling blocks, like how to overcome different stumbling blocks as a reader, questions and answers. We're going to be just kind of doing a general dance around FAQ question. Also coming up, and I don't know if this is happening this month or next month, but I have a very special interview coming up on a future podcast about an amazing human being who put together a zine about craft beer and tarot pairings, and that is amazing to me. I got to read at the launch party for the zine. I'm looking at a copy of the zine right now. I have it on my bulletin board, and it's so cool. And as soon as they reached out to me, I was like, this is the coolest. Can I put you on my podcast? So at some point I will be interviewing them. That's going to be really fun. Stick around for that. If not next month, it'll be the following month. Regardless, next month come back, because we will be talking about troubleshooting, getting out of ruts with the tarot, how to level up, and how to get over the stumbling blocks that we have as a reader. Okay? For now, happy reading. Remember to be kind to yourselves. Remember, this is a great time to be introspective rather than externally productive. That is the message of the High Priestess. A great way to do that is to deepen your tarot practice. I'm just saying. Have a wonderful everybody. I'll see you next year.